The dusty horizon stretched endlessly as Xavier Morgan leaned against the weathered fence post, his calloused hands gripping the worn wood. The setting sun cast long shadows across the prairie, painting everything in hues of amber and gold. He watched as his 16-year-old son Thomas embraced Rose Blackburn, their silhouettes merging into one against the fading light. Something unfamiliar and unwelcome twisted in Xavier's chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since losing his wife, Emily, 7 years ago. Colorado Territory, 1876. The land was as unforgiving as it was beautiful, and Xavier had carved out a modest ranch just outside the growing settlement of Silver Creek. At 38, he had resigned himself to a life of solitude, focused only on raising his son and maintaining their cattle ranch. But Rose Blackburn's arrival in town 6 months ago had changed everything. "Pa, Rose and I are going to take a walk before supper," Thomas called, his voice carrying across the yard. Xavier raised a hand in acknowledgement, his throat too tight for words. Thomas had his mother's eyes and gentle nature, but Xavier's determination and height. At 16, he was already nearly as tall as his father, filling out from the hard work of ranch life. Rose was 22, a schoolteacher who'd come west seeking independence after losing her parents to influenza back east. She'd taken to Thomas immediately, impressed by his intelligence and kind heart. Xavier had initially welcomed their friendship, glad to see his often serious son laughing and animated again. But lately, something had changed. Xavier turned away from the young couple and headed toward the barn, needing to busy his hands. Inside, he grabbed a brush and began grooming his stallion, Midnight, with more force than necessary. "You're going to take his hide off if you keep that up," a familiar voice drawled. Xavier glanced up to see his closest friend and neighbor, Jeremiah Cooper, leaning against the doorframe, a knowing look on his weathered face. "Just got some energy to burn," Xavier muttered, easing his strokes. Jeremiah snorted. "More like you got something eating at you." "Wouldn't have anything to do with that pretty schoolteacher making eyes at your boy, would it?" Xavier stiffened. "Don't be ridiculous. Thomas is he's just being friendly. And I'm the Queen of England," Jeremiah replied, pushing off from the doorframe and approaching. "Xavier, I've known you since we fought together in the war. I can read you like yesterday's newspaper." Xavier set down the brush and leaned against the stall. "She's too old for him, He's just a boy. Thomas ain't a boy anymore, not really. Not out here. And 6 years ain't so much. She should be with someone more established," Xavier argued, not meeting his friend's gaze. Jeremiah's laugh echoed in the barn. "Someone more established? You mean someone like you?" Xavier's head snapped up, denial ready on his lips, but Jeremiah held up a hand. "Save it. I see how you look at her when you think nobody's watching. It's the same way you used to look at Emily." His voice softened. "It's okay to feel something again, Xavier." "It doesn't matter what I feel," Xavier replied gruffly. "Thomas is smitten with her, and she seems to care for him too." "Does she now?" Jeremiah asked, a strange note in his voice. "You sure about that?" Before Xavier could respond, the dinner bell rang from the main house. Their housekeeper, Martha Wilson, would have supper ready. Martha had come to help after Emily died, a widow herself who needed work and understood grief. "Coming to eat with us?" Xavier asked. Jeremiah nodded. Wouldn't miss Martha's cooking for all the gold in the Colorado hills. The two men walked toward the house in companionable silence, though Xavier's mind was anything but quiet. Inside, the atmosphere was warm and inviting. Martha had prepared a hearty stew with fresh baked bread, the aroma filling the modest but comfortable home. Thomas and Rose were already seated, their cheeks flushed from their walk and the cooling evening air. "Evening, Miss Blackburn," Jeremiah greeted with an exaggerated tip of his hat. "You're looking lovelier than a spring morning, as usual." Rose laughed, the sound like music in the humble room. "Mr. Cooper, your flattery will earn you an extra helping of stew, but not much else." "Worth a try." Jeremiah winked, taking his seat. Xavier settled at the head of the table, trying not to stare at Rose. Her chestnut hair was slightly windblown, and her green eyes sparkled with life. She wore a simple blue dress, modest and practical, yet somehow she made it look elegant. "How are the lessons going with the Henderson children?" Xavier asked, focusing on serving himself stew. Rose brightened. "Oh, they're coming along wonderfully. Even little Sarah is reading now, and she's only 5. Miss Blackburn is the best teacher Silver Creek has ever had, Thomas declared proudly. Sheriff Daniels told me yesterday that enrollment at the schoolhouse has doubled since she arrived. That's because she doesn't believe in using the switch like old Mr. Peterson did. Martha chimed in, bringing a pitcher of fresh milk to the table. Children learn better when they're not terrified. I believe in discipline, Rose clarified, but also in encouragement. Sometimes a kind word accomplishes more than a harsh one. Xavier felt her gaze on him briefly and wondered if there was a message for him in those words. He'd been distant with her lately, he knew that. Initially, he'd been friendly and welcoming, but as he noticed her growing closeness with Thomas, he'd withdrawn. Pa, Rose was telling me about the library they're establishing in Denver, Thomas said eagerly. They're looking for donations of books. I thought we might be able to send some of Mother's. Xavier tensed. Emily's books were still on the shelves in what had been their bedroom, untouched since her death. He'd read to her during her final days, her body wasted from consumption, but her mind still sharp. I don't think, he began, but Rose interrupted gently. Thomas mentioned your late wife was a lover of literature, Mr. Morgan, she said softly. I would never presume to suggest parting with anything precious to her memory. Please forget we mentioned it. The genuine understanding in her voice made something in Xavier's chest ache. No, he cleared his throat. Emily would have liked the idea. Books should be read, not gathering dust. I'll look through them. Thomas looked surprised, but pleased. Thanks, Pa. Conversation flowed more easily after that, with Jeremiah regaling them with tales of his latest hunting expedition and Martha sharing town gossip. Xavier found himself watching Rose as she listened intently to each speaker, asking thoughtful questions and laughing at all the right moments. There was a genuine warmth to her that reminded him painfully of Emily. After dinner, when Rose announced she should return to town before dark, Thomas immediately volunteered to escort her. I'll saddle the horses, he said, pushing back from the table. I can take Miss Blackburn home, Xavier found himself saying. You've got those fence posts to set in the north pasture before tomorrow. Thomas frowned. But Pa, that can wait until it's all right. Thomas, Rose interjected gently. Your father is right. Those fence posts need setting before the cattle break through again. Mr. Morgan, I'd be grateful for the escort, thank you. The gratitude in her eyes seemed sincere, and Xavier felt a flicker of hope that perhaps she wasn't as eager for his son's company as he'd feared. Thomas reluctantly agreed, though not without a lingering hug goodbye to Rose that made Xavier's jaw clench. He turned away, busying himself with gathering his hat and coat. 10 minutes later, Xavier and Rose were riding side by side down the trail to town, the setting sun casting long shadows ahead of them. Rose rode side saddle with practiced grace, her profile illuminated by the golden light. Thank you for dinner, Mr. Morgan, she said after they'd ridden in silence for a while. Your home is always so welcoming. Martha deserves the credit for that, he replied. She's been a godsend these past years. Yes, but a house reflects its owner, no matter who tends to it, Rose observed. There's warmth there that comes from you and Thomas. Xavier wasn't sure how to respond, so he changed the subject. Thomas seems very taken with you. If he expected her to blush or look away, she surprised him. Instead, she met his gaze directly, a small crease forming between her brows. Thomas is a wonderful young man, she said carefully. You've raised him well. He's kind, intelligent, and thoughtful qualities not always found in abundance out here. He's still young, Xavier said, unable to keep a note of warning from his voice. Yes, he is, Rose agreed without hesitation. Too young, in many ways. The simple statement hung between them as their horses continued along the path. Xavier studied her profile, trying to decipher her meaning. Miss Blackburn, he began. Please, call me Rose, she interrupted. After all these months of sharing your table, I think we've moved beyond formalities, don't you? Rose, then, he conceded, the name feeling intimate on his tongue. I've noticed how much time you and Thomas spend together. She looked at him directly again. Does that concern you? He's 16, Xavier said bluntly. You're 22, she supplied when he hesitated. Yes, I'm aware of our ages, Mr. Morgan. Xavier, he corrected automatically. A smile touched her lips. Xavier. She was quiet for a moment. Your son is dear to me, but perhaps not in the way you seem to think." Before he could ask what she meant, they rounded a bend in the trail and came upon an overturned wagon. A man was struggling to right it, while a woman sat nearby, clutching a crying infant. Xavier immediately dismounted. "Stay here," he told Rose, but she was already sliding from her saddle. "I'll see to the woman and child," she said decisively, gathering her skirts and hurrying over. Xavier approached the man, who looked up gratefully. "Much obliged, mister. We'll caught a rut, and the whole thing went over. Thought I could manage it myself, but let's get it upright first," Xavier suggested, positioning himself on the other side of the wagon. With their combined strength, they managed to right the vehicle. The wheel was damaged, but not beyond repair. "Name's Paul Jenkins," the man said, extending his hand. "That's my wife Mary and our son William." "Xavier Morgan," he replied, shaking the offered hand. "And that's Miss Rose Blackburn with your family." Looking over, Xavier saw that Rose had the baby in her arms now. The crying quieted. She was speaking softly to the mother, who looked exhausted but relieved. "You folks headed to Silver Creek?" Xavier asked. Paul nodded, hoping to open a carpentry shop there. "Heard it was a growing town." "That it is, and in need of a good carpenter," Xavier confirmed. "The wheel needs work before you can continue, though. My ranch is about 2 miles back. You're welcome to stay the night, and I can help you repair it in the morning." "That's mighty generous," Paul said, relief evident on his face. Xavier whistled, and Rose looked over. He gestured for her to bring the woman and child, then turned back to Paul. "Let's secure what we can on the wagon and lead your horse. We'll come back for the rest tomorrow." By the time they reached the ranch, night had fallen completely. Martha was surprised by the additional guests, but quickly made up beds in the spare room for the Jenkins family. Thomas emerged from the barn, having finished his work with the fence posts, and helped unload the salvageable items they'd brought from the wagon. His eyes kept darting to Rose, who was inside helping Martha settle the mother and baby. "Pa," Thomas said when they had a moment alone, "why did you insist on taking Rose home?" Xavier sighed. "It wasn't about that, Thomas. I just thought the fence needed tending." "You've been acting strange whenever she's around," his son persisted. "Do you not like her?" "Of course I like her," Xavier replied, perhaps too quickly. "She's a fine teacher and a good woman." Thomas studied him for a moment. Then his eyes widened with sudden understanding. You have feelings for her, don't you?" Xavier felt the blood drain from his face. "Thomas, that's not, you do," Thomas interrupted, a strange mix of emotions crossing his young face. "I should have seen it. The way you look at her when you think no one's watching." "Son, it's complicated," Xavier began, but Thomas shook his head. "It's not complicated, Pa. It's actually simple." A small, sad smile touched his lips. "You should tell her." Xavier stared at his son in confusion. "But I thought, you and she." Thomas actually laughed, though there was a touch of melancholy to it. "Rose has been helping me write letters to Abigail Peterson. You remember the banker's daughter who visited last summer? We've been corresponding since she returned to St. Louis. Rose has been giving me advice, helping me express my feelings properly." Xavier felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. "Abigail Peterson? But you and Rose are always together, laughing, sharing secrets." "Because she's helping me," Thomas explained. "And because, well, I think she enjoys spending time here." He gave his father a meaningful look. "But not because of me, Pa." Before Xavier could respond, the door to the house opened, and Rose stepped onto the porch. "Martha says supper will be ready in 20 minutes, she called. "Mr. Jenkins is getting cleaned up." Thomas gave his father a gentle push toward the house. "I need to finish something in the barn. You go ahead." Feeling as though he was walking in a dream, Xavier made his way to the porch. Rose waited for him, the lamplight from inside casting a warm glow around her. "Are you all right?" she asked, noting his expression. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just had an illuminating conversation with my son," he admitted. Something like understanding dawned in her eyes. "Oh, about anything in particular?" "About you," he said directly, finding courage he hadn't known he possessed. "And about how I've been a fool." Rose's lips curved into a small smile. "In what way exactly?" But before he could elaborate, Martha called them in for supper, and the moment was lost. The evening passed pleasantly, with Paul Jenkins sharing stories of his travels and hopes for establishing his business in Silver Creek. Mary, recovered somewhat from the ordeal, was quiet but grateful, cradling her sleeping infant. Thomas was unusually subdued, watching his father and Rose with a thoughtful expression. After the Jenkins family retired to the spare room and Martha to her quarters off the kitchen, Thomas announced he was turning in as well. "Good night, Pa," he said, then turned to Rose with a warm smile. "Good night, Miss Blackburn. Thank you for everything." Rose embraced him briefly. "Sleep well, Thomas." Xavier watched his boy hug her goodbye, and in that moment, he realized with complete clarity that he wanted to be the one to hold her. Not out of jealousy toward his son, Thomas's revelation had eliminated that complication, but because something had awakened in him that he thought had died with Emily. Something he could no longer deny or ignore. As Thomas disappeared up the stairs, Xavier found himself alone with Rose in the parlor, the crackling fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. "It's getting late," Rose said softly. "I should return to town." "Stay," Xavier said, then hastily added, "Martha's here as a proper chaperone. It's too dark to ride now, and the trail can be dangerous at night." Rose hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you. I can sleep on the sofa here." "No need for that. You can take my room. I'll sleep down here." She started to protest, but he held up a hand. "I insist. I've slept in conditions far worse than my own parlor sofa." A small smile touched her lips. "Very well. But before I retire, I think we should finish our conversation from earlier." Xavier gestured to the chairs by the fire. "Please sit." Once they were settled, Rose looked at him expectantly. "You mentioned being a fool." Xavier took a deep breath. "I believed that you and Thomas were developing an attachment." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "And that troubled you." "Yes," he admitted, "but not for the reasons you might think. Not only because of his age, or yours." "Then why?" she asked, though something in her expression suggested she already knew the answer. Xavier met her gaze directly. "Because I found myself wishing it was me instead." The words hung in the air between them, irrevocable now that they'd been spoken. Rose didn't look away, her green eyes steady on his. "Thomas told me about Abigail," Xavier continued when she remained silent. "About how you've been helping him with his letters to her." Rose nodded. "He's quite smitten with her. It's rather sweet. And all this time I thought." Xavier shook his head, embarrassed by his misunderstanding. "He admires me as a teacher and friend," Rose said softly. "Nothing more." "And what about me?" Xavier asked, his voice lower. "How do you see me, Rose?" She considered him for a long moment, the firelight playing across her features. "From the first day I arrived in Silver Creek, I noticed you, Xavier Morgan. Not just because you're one of the most respected ranchers in the area, or because of your kindness in helping me settle in. There was something about you, a strength, a depth of character that drew me." His heart hammered in his chest. But you were distant. Polite. Always, but guarded. And then there was Thomas, so eager for friendship and guidance. It seemed safer to focus my attention there." A small smile touched her lips. "Though I confess, my thoughts often wandered to his father." Xavier could scarcely believe what he was hearing. "I've been alone for 7 years," he said quietly. "Since Emily passed. I never thought I'd feel anything like this again. I wasn't prepared for it." "And now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Instead of answering with words, Xavier rose from his chair and knelt before hers, taking her hands in his. They were smaller than his, but not delicate, the hands of a woman who worked hard and lived fully. "Now I know that the heart doesn't die when it's broken," he said. "It just waits, dormant, until someone special comes along to awaken it again." Rose's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Xavier, I don't expect anything from you," he hurried to add. "I just needed you to know. If you don't feel the same, but I do," she interrupted, squeezing his hands. "I've been drawn to you from the beginning, though I hardly dared hope you might return the feeling." The admission hung between them like a precious, fragile thing. Xavier raised one hand to gently touch her cheek, and she leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "May I kiss you, Rose Blackburn?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Her answer was to lean forward, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened, years of loneliness melting away in the warmth of newfound connection. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I should go upstairs," Rose said, though she made no move to rise. "Before we forget ourselves." Xavier nodded, reluctantly releasing her hands and standing. "You're right. We have time. There's no need to rush." She stood as well, gathering her composure. "Good night, Xavier." "Good night, Rose." He watched as she ascended the stairs, turning once to smile at him before disappearing down the hallway. Xavier sank back into his chair, staring into the dying fire. His heart felt lighter than it had in years, filled with a hope he'd thought lost forever. The morning brought clear skies and renewed purpose. Xavier rose early, having slept surprisingly well on the parlor sofa. He stoked the fire and started coffee brewing, then stepped out onto the porch to watch the sunrise. "Early riser," came Rose's voice from behind him. He turned to find her in the doorway, her hair loose around her shoulders, wearing one of Martha's spare nightgowns with a shawl wrapped around her. "Habit of a lifetime," he replied, drinking in the sight of her in the soft morning light. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I expected," she admitted, joining him at the porch railing. "Your room smells like you cedar and leather." The intimacy of the observation made his pulse quicken. "I hope that's not unpleasant." "Quite the opposite," she assured him, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. They stood side by side, watching as the sun's rays gradually illuminated the landscape, turning the distant mountains gold and pink. "It's beautiful here," Rose said softly. "I can see why you never left, even after Emily died," he finished for her. "Yes, this land gets in your blood. And it was our dream together, this ranch. Leaving would have felt like abandoning her somehow." Rose nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Tell me about her, if you want." And so Xavier did, speaking more freely about Emily than he had in years. How they'd met in Denver when he was working as a cowhand, and she was the daughter of a merchant. How they'd eloped when her father disapproved of the match, heading west with little more than hope and determination. The struggles of those early years, building the ranch from nothing. The joy when Thomas was born, and the devastating loss when consumption took her, slowly and painfully. "She made me promise to live, not just exist," Xavier concluded, his voice thick with memory. "But I didn't know how to do that without her. Not until recently." Rose's hand found his on the railing, her touch warm and reassuring. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Xavier agreed. "You would have liked each other, I think." Before Rose could respond, the door opened behind them, and Thomas emerged, looking surprised to find them together. "Morning," he said, glancing between them with undisguised curiosity. "Am I interrupting?" "Not at all," Rose assured him, though she didn't remove her hand from Xavier's. "Your father was just telling me about your mother." Something like approval flashed in Thomas's eyes. "She was amazing. I wish I remembered her better." "You were only 9, Xavier reminded him gently. "But you have her eyes. And her kind heart." Thomas smiled, then cleared his throat. "Pa, I was thinking I could ride into town and fetch some supplies to repair Mr. Jenkins's wagon. Maybe bring Doc Stevens back to check on Mrs. Jenkins and the baby, just to be safe." Xavier nodded, recognizing his son's attempt to give them privacy. "Good thinking. Take the wagon so you can bring back everything we'll need." After a quick breakfast, the household sprang into activity. Thomas departed for town, while Xavier and Paul assessed the damage to the wagon wheel more thoroughly in daylight. Martha tended to Mary and the baby, while Rose offered to help with the morning chores. Xavier found her in the chicken coop, collecting eggs with practiced ease. "You seem at home with farm work," he observed, leaning against the doorframe. Rose looked up with a smile. "I grew up on a small farm in Pennsylvania. Before my parents died, and I trained as a teacher. There's a lot I still don't know about you," Xavier realized. "We have time to learn," she replied, her eyes holding a promise that made his heart swell. The day passed in productive activity. Thomas returned with supplies and Doc Stevens, who pronounced Mary and baby William in good health despite their ordeal. By mid-afternoon, Xavier and Paul had repaired the wagon wheel. "We can't thank you enough," Paul said as they prepared to depart. "Not just for the repair, but for your hospitality." "That's how we do things out here," Xavier replied. "Neighbors help neighbors." "Then I look forward to being your neighbor," Paul said, shaking his hand firmly. As the Jenkins family set off for town, Rose came to stand beside Xavier, watching them go. Will you be returning to town with them? He asked, trying to keep the disappointment from his voice. She turned to him, her expression thoughtful. I should. I have lessons to prepare for Monday. Of course, he nodded, understanding but reluctant to see her go. Unless, she hesitated, then continued more boldly. Unless you'd like to accompany me back later? Perhaps we could have dinner at the hotel restaurant? People might talk, but… Let them talk, Xavier said firmly. I'd be proud to be seen with you, Rose. Her smile was radiant. Then it's a date, Mr. Morgan. Our first official one, he agreed, taking her hand and raising it to his lips. Thomas, who had been helping the Jenkins family load their belongings, approached as the wagon disappeared down the trail. Everything all right? He asked, noting their clasped hands with obvious approval. Xavier looked at his son, marveling at the young man he'd become. More than all right. Rose has agreed to have dinner with me in town tonight. About time, Thomas grinned. I was wondering how long it would take you two to figure things out. Rose laughed. Were we that obvious? To everyone except each other, apparently. Thomas replied cheekily. Then, more seriously, I'm happy for you, Pa. For both of you. The sincerity in his voice touched Xavier deeply. Thank you, son. That means a lot. They spent the afternoon together, the three of them, in a comfortable camaraderie that felt both new and somehow familiar. Thomas shared stories of his correspondence with Abigail, his hopes that her father might allow her to visit again in the summer. Rose spoke of her plans for expanding the school curriculum, her vision for bringing more books and learning opportunities to the frontier children. Xavier mostly listened, his heart full at the sight of the two people he cared for most, getting along so well. As evening approached, Xavier and Rose prepared to ride into town. He'd put on his best shirt and vest, and she'd changed back into her blue dress, her hair neatly arranged. You look beautiful, he told her as he helped her mount her horse. You clean up rather nicely yourself, she replied with a teasing smile. Thomas stood on the porch, watching them. Don't hurry back on my account, he called as they set off. Martha's staying overnight, so I won't be alone. Xavier shook his head, amused by his son's not-so-subtle encouragement. Home by 10, he called back firmly. Don't wait up. The ride to town was pleasant, the early evening air cool, but not cold. They talked easily, sharing stories and observations, finding more common ground with each passing mile. By the time they reached Silver Creek, Xavier felt as though he'd known Rose for years rather than months. The town was busy for a Saturday evening, with the saloon doing brisk business and families strolling the boardwalks. More than a few curious glances came their way as Xavier helped Rose dismount in front of the Grand Hotel, the finest establishment in Silver Creek, which wasn't saying much, but it was clean and respectable. Word will be all over town by morning, Rose murmured as they entered the hotel restaurant. Does that bother you? Xavier asked, suddenly concerned about her reputation as the town's teacher. Not in the least, she assured him, taking his arm more firmly. I've never been one to care much for gossip. The hotel owner's wife, Mrs. Peterson, showed them to a table with a knowing smile. How lovely to see you both. A special occasion? Just enjoying each other's company, Mrs. Peterson, Rose replied smoothly. Well, you make a handsome couple, the older woman declared before bustling off to fetch menus. Xavier felt a surge of pride at her words. They were a couple now, weren't they? The thought warmed him through. Dinner was excellent by frontier standards: tender beef, fresh vegetables from the hotel's garden, and apple pie for dessert. They lingered over coffee, reluctant for the evening to end. Would you like to walk a bit before heading back? Xavier suggested as they finally left the restaurant. It's a beautiful night. Rose agreed readily. The streets of Silver Creek were quieter now, though light and piano music still spilled from the saloon. They walked arm in arm to the edge of town, where a small park had been established near the creek that gave the settlement its name. Under the silver light of the rising moon, Xavier felt emboldened to speak what was in his heart. Rose, these past 6 months since you came to Silver Creek have awakened something in me that I thought was gone forever. Yesterday, when I watched Thomas embrace you, something clicked into place. I realized I wanted to be the one holding you, not out of any resentment toward my son, but because what I feel for you is profound. She turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. I feel the same way, Xavier. I came west seeking independence, a new start. I wasn't looking for love. But then I met you, and gradually, you became the center of my thoughts. He took both her hands in his. I know it's early days yet, but I want you to know that I'm serious about this about us. You're not a passing fancy or a distraction. I never thought I was, she said softly. You're not the type of man who gives his heart lightly. Neither am I. No, he agreed, drawing her closer. So when I do this, he leaned down to kiss her, a gentle, lingering kiss that made his pulse race. Know that it means something. I do know, she whispered against his lips. And I feel the same. They returned to the ranch riding side by side, their horses at a leisurely pace, neither wanting the evening to end. The house was dark except for a single lamp left burning in the parlor. Xavier helped Rose dismount, then led the horses to the barn. When he returned, she was waiting on the porch, her face thoughtful in the dim light. What's on your mind? He asked, joining her. I was just thinking about how unexpected life can be, she replied. A year ago, I was teaching at a girls' school in Philadelphia, following a safe, predictable path. Now I'm here, under these endless stars, with you. Regrets? He asked quietly. She turned to him with a smile that made his heart skip. Not a single one. Xavier pulled her gently into his arms, marveling at how perfectly she fit there. Stay, he murmured into her hair. Not just tonight. I mean, make your home here, with us. Rose leaned back to look at his face, her eyes wide. Xavier, are you asking? Not marriage. Not yet, he clarified. That would be too soon for both of us. But the cabin by the creek, the one Jeremiah stays in, sometimes it's sitting empty. You could live there, have your independence, but be close. Get to know this place, and me, better. See if this is truly what you want. She considered this, her expression thoughtful. People would talk even more than they already will. Let them, he said dismissively. We know the truth of what we are to each other, and what we might become. Rose's smile returned, slow and sure. Yes, she said simply. I'd like that very much. A week later, Rose moved her modest belongings into the creek cabin, which Xavier and Thomas had spent days cleaning and preparing. It was small but sound, with a pleasant view of both the creek and the main ranch house. Close enough for daily interaction, but separate enough to maintain propriety and independence. The arrangement raised eyebrows in Silver Creek at first, but as the weeks passed and Xavier courted Rose with respectful determination, the gossip died down. The school children adored their teacher too much to listen to any unkind words about her, and Xavier's standing in the community was too solid to be shaken by something as mild as having the schoolteacher living on his property. Summer came, bringing with it the arrival of Abigail Peterson for a month-long visit with her aunt and uncle, the hotel owners. Thomas blossomed in her presence, his boyish infatuation deepening into something more mature. Xavier recognized the signs, the same light in his son's eyes that he now felt in his own heart when he looked at Rose. They make a handsome couple, Rose observed one evening as they watched Thomas and Abigail strolling by the creek, carefully chaperoned by Mrs. Peterson watching from a distance. They do, Xavier agreed, his arm around Rose's shoulders as they sat on the porch swing he'd installed at the creek cabin. She's a good match for him, bright, kind, with enough spirit to keep him on his toes. Like mother, like son, Rose teased, nudging him gently. You Morgan men seem drawn to women who challenge you. It's true, he laughed, pulling her closer. Life's too short for anything less. 3 months after Rose moved to the creek cabin, on a crisp fall evening with leaves turning gold and red on the surrounding hills, Xavier asked her to marry him. They were riding the property boundaries, something they often did together now, as Rose had proven herself an excellent horsewoman and a keen observer of the land. They stopped at a high point overlooking the ranch, the house, barns, and grazing lands spread out below them, the mountains rising majestically in the distance. I built this place with Emily, Xavier said quietly, breaking a comfortable silence. Every fence post, every building has a memory attached to it. Rose waited, giving him space to continue. For years after she died, those memories were painful. I preserved everything as it was, afraid that changing anything would somehow mean losing her all over again. He turned in his saddle to face Rose directly. But these past months, You've helped me see that honoring her memory doesn't mean standing still. It means living fully, as she wanted me to. She sounds like a wise woman, Rose said softly. She was, and she would have liked you very much. Xavier reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. This was hers. I had it resized. Rose's eyes widened as he opened the box to reveal a delicate gold band with a single pearl set in the center. Rose Blackburn, I love you. These months together have been the happiest I've known in 7 years. Will you marry me, make your home with us permanently, and help me build something new on the foundation of what came before? Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. Yes, Xavier. Yes, with all my heart. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then leaned across the gap between their horses to kiss her, a kiss full of promise and future. The wedding took place in December, with the first light snow dusting the ground. The entire town turned out for the ceremony in the small Silver Creek church, followed by a celebration at the ranch that continued well into the night. Thomas stood proudly as his father's best man, while Abigail, who had returned for the occasion, served as Rose's maid of honor. You've given him back to us, Thomas told Rose privately during the festivities. After Mother died, he was here, but not really present. You've brought him back to life. Rose hugged him tightly. He's given me just as much, Thomas. A home, a family, a place to belong. As winter settled over the Colorado territory, the Morgan ranch adjusted to its new rhythm with Rose as mistress of the household. She continued teaching at the Silver Creek School, riding in each morning and home each afternoon, her presence bringing new energy and ideas to both spheres of her life. Xavier found himself rediscovering the joy in simple moments, waking beside her each morning, sharing meals and conversation, working the land with renewed purpose, and falling asleep with her in his arms each night. The grief for Emily would always be part of him, but it no longer defined him. Rose had helped him understand that the heart has infinite capacity for love, that new joy doesn't diminish past happiness but builds upon it. Spring brought news that Thomas had been accepted to study law in Denver, an ambition he developed through his correspondence with Abigail, whose father was a prominent attorney. Xavier felt both pride and a touch of melancholy at the prospect of his son leaving home. He'll be back, Rose assured him as they discussed it one evening. This land is in his blood too. But he needs to find his own path first. I know, Xavier nodded. And Denver isn't so far. We'll see him often. Rose looked thoughtful, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. Besides, the house won't be empty for long. It took a moment for her meaning to register, but when it did, Xavier's face broke into a smile of wonder. Are you saying? Dr. Stevens confirmed it yesterday. She nodded, her eyes bright with happiness. We're going to have a baby, Xavier. In late autumn. He swept her into his arms, his heart overflowing. At 40, he had never expected to be a father again, had thought that chapter of his life complete. But now, with Rose, everything felt new again. Thomas will be thrilled, he said when he could speak. He's always wanted a sibling. Better late than never. Rose laughed, joy radiating from her. I hope it's a girl, with your eyes and determination. Boy or girl, they'll be lucky to have you as their mother, Xavier told her, his voice thick with emotion. The months that followed were filled with preparation and anticipation. Thomas departed for Denver in August, promising to return for Christmas and to meet his new sibling. Letters arrived regularly from him, full of excitement about his studies and about Abigail, who had returned to St. Louis but remained faithful in her correspondence. In October, just as the aspen trees turned golden on the mountainsides, Rose gave birth to a daughter they named Emily Rose Morgan, a tribute to the past and a celebration of the present. She had Xavier's dark hair and strong features, but Rose's green eyes and determined spirit. Holding his daughter for the first time, Xavier felt his life come full circle. The loss that had nearly broken him had led, through a winding path of grief and healing, to this moment of perfect joy. Rose watched him from the bed, tired but radiant, and he knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Thank you, he whispered, sitting beside her with their daughter cradled between them. For what? Rose asked, her fingers gently stroking the baby's cheek. For coming to Silver Creek. For seeing something in me worth loving. For giving me a second chance at happiness. We gave each other that chance, she corrected gently. And we'll keep building on it, day by day. Xavier leaned forward to kiss her, his heart full to bursting. Outside, the Colorado sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, a fitting backdrop to the new chapter unfolding within the walls of the Morgan Ranch, a story of love found, lost, and found again, more precious the second time around. 5 years later, the Morgan Ranch had expanded in both acreage and family. Emily Rose, now a spirited 5-year-old with her father's confidence and her mother's intelligence, had been joined by a 3-year-old brother, James Thomas Morgan. The children filled the once quiet house with laughter and energy that kept both parents on their toes. Thomas had completed his law studies and returned to Silver Creek, establishing a practice that served the growing community. He'd brought Abigail Peterson with him as his wife, having married her in St. Louis the previous spring. They were building their own home on the northern edge of the Morgan property, close enough for family meals, but separate enough for privacy. Rose continued to teach, though now only 3 days a week, having trained several assistant teachers to help with the expanded school. She'd also established a small library in town, fulfilling her vision of bringing literature and learning to the frontier children. Xavier, now in his mid-40s but more vigorous than ever, had grown the ranch into one of the most successful operations in the territory. But his greatest pride was his family, the love and partnership he shared with Rose, the man Thomas had become, and the 2 young children who represented the future. On warm evenings, the extended Morgan family often gathered on the main house porch, watching the sunset while the children played in the yard. It was during one such gathering that Xavier, watching his daughter showing her little brother how to catch fireflies, felt a wave of gratitude so intense it nearly overwhelmed him. "What are you thinking?" Rose asked, slipping her hand into his as she joined him at the porch railing. Xavier looked at his wife of 6 years, still struck by her beauty and the depth of feeling he saw in her eyes when she looked at him. "I was thinking about that day, watching Thomas hug you goodbye," he said quietly. "How something shifted inside me in that moment. How I finally admitted to myself what I'd been feeling for months. That was quite a turning point," she agreed with a smile. "For both of us. If I hadn't spoken up, you would have, eventually," Rose said confidently. "Some things are meant to be, Xavier. I believe that." From across the yard, Emily called out excitedly, "Look, Papa, we caught one." Xavier waved acknowledgement to his daughter, then turned back to Rose. "I believe it too," he said, drawing her close. "Some things are simply meant to be." And as the Colorado dusk deepened around them, painting the landscape in shades of purple and gold, Xavier Morgan held his wife close, grateful beyond words for the second chance at love that had brought them to this perfect moment, a moment built on loss and hope, struggle and joy, and the courage to reach for happiness when it appeared unexpectedly on the horizon.